Okay, we'll make a start, everybody. So welcome to the Public Accountability Board for June. And I won't welcome everybody either in the room or remotely, but just to say I think we have some members of the Police and Crime Panel beaming in, and from the Violence Reduction Unit as well. They're all very welcome, and we usually have someone from the press, the media as well. We are being filmed, so if you don't want to be filmed, then you should leave the room, or don't leave the room, don't just come in the room, or disappear from the screen.
I don't think we have an option in that regard, do we?
We're on the agenda, we're on to item 3, announcements. I haven't got no public questions, no urgent items. I'm just having a quick look around the room, no urgent items, and no reason to exclude press and public for any item. Declarations of interest, declarations of interest. If not, we'll move to the minutes of the last meeting, which are pages 5 to 12 in the pack. And unless someone has a comment on any of those pages, I'll assume that the minutes are an accurate reflection of what took place. Thank you very much. And we come to the actions from those minutes. I think they're all covered off, but Michelle just reminded us.
So the second two definitely are covered off. The first one in relation to a drugs market problem profile arising from the 11th of April is nearly there. So if we can have that as ongoing, Commissioner, I think it's imminent.
Sure, yeah, so we keep that one going and the others we can discharge. So we come to false performance. This is item 10 on the agenda pack, and we, as you know, we go around the districts in turn, and today it's the turn of Doncaster. We've not got Ian Prophet, the district commander, in the room, but he is on the screen, so I'm hoping that he can hear us.
Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioner, Chief Constable, members of the Crime Panel. Apologies for not being present. I hope you can hear me clearly enough.
We can hear you very clearly, and we can hear you more clearly than we could in the room, would be my guess. And we can see you very clearly on the screen. So I'm looking at the Doncaster District Performance Report, and we'll do what we normally do, which is not to go through it in any detail, but just to pick on one or two things. Perhaps I could begin, Ian, by saying, well, first of all, thank you for the report, which is, as usual, a full, comprehensive report. But also what struck me reading it and standing back a little bit from it was the increase in demand and pressures that are coming upon you, and the stretched nature of your resources there, and the general sense that there isn't going to be any change in that anytime soon. You seem to be looking quite a bit towards October, perhaps the coming of the new the student police officers when they come through. I just wonder if you could say a little word about that.
No, of course, we do have, as you'll see from the report, some increases in demand. Our incident demand has increased sort of in the 12 months up to April of this year versus the previous year, and that's around 16.5% to 17% increase in demand. And I suppose within that there is an increase in some of the crime trends, which I'll be able to just give you a bit of reassurance about what we're putting in place to address that. I suppose just in context of that increase in demand, it's absolutely a consideration of ours that moving out of sort of that COVID period, lockdowns and restrictions will no doubt have impacted a number of our demand streams. So I guess really there's an inevitability that into the sort of last 6 months of the last financial year, we would expect that demand to increase. In terms of our resources to meet it, yes, you'll be aware that we have got some challenges at the moment, as not exclusive to Doncaster, and I don't think exclusive to South Yorkshire Police, to be fair. You'll be well cited, Commissioner, on the numbers of student officers that are currently being trained and the volumes that are being delivered into each of the different policing districts. And you are right to note that we do have start to feel like we get some of those numbers really landing and being with us permanently in October. with the 2 cohorts that are permanent from October onwards, and will have ceased their status as student officers. And that coincides actually with a number of other cohorts of students that are being trained that will be on their rotations, and we'll see them in the district in either response or neighbourhood functions. So I know we will feel like we're in a better place in October, but I don't want anybody to imagine that we are simply just holding on until that particular point in time. We are addressing our summer period through planning to ensure that we've got enough people to get us through that summer period. And you may well have heard of the phrase of summer surge to assist us and support us during that time. We look across all of our different portfolios to support each other to make sure that we can best manage our demand. And I'm very keen here is that despite some of the challenges in terms of our numbers, that we allow our neighbourhood teams to do the work that they really should be doing, which is about dealing with local issues, community-based problems, and using problem solving to try and help reduce the demand in the first place, which will also help not just about numbers of people, it's about taking a problem solving approach to our work.
Okay. Just on that, you mentioned the summer surge. How realistic is that if you are stretched? I mean, what's the consequence of doing that? The impact that you then have on the officer numbers, presumably they've got to make up, if they're going on overtime, etc., you're going to have to make up for that later in the year. So you're going to put more pressure on yourself.
Well, no, I think a reasonable question, of course, Commissioner, but this isn't the first time that we've done it. So this, we are getting used to that now, and inevitably we have an eye on the well-being of the staff that work that overtime, and we ensure that we have enough resilience throughout the year to give those officers their required leave. So I think that as an organisation, particularly my district and with my command team, I think we're more than capable of managing that now. We've gone through it before. We've put it into practice. We've learned any lessons we've had from that, and I think we've been very focused on specific time frames to use it. We're not using summer surge every single day of the week. There are periods of time, having looked at where our demand tends to peak. We look at those particular periods of time to bring about an additional resilience across the teams, which will help us with that demand. So,
Commissioner, if I could come in just to support.
Yeah.
I mean, having looked at the demands and that we predict, certainly looking at the previous year, certainly looking and taking into account what happened over the Easter bank holiday weekend, where we experienced a big upsurge in demand. Taking all those things into account, and also looking at the sort of national sort of story, if you like, with more challenges around getting abroad. In fact, Steve and I were talking about that before the meeting started, and various other things. We know we're going to be in for a tricky summer in relation to the demand increases that we're anticipating. So to take that into account, beginning towards the end of July, running all the way through the summer months, and certainly the summer holiday period, we've decided to sort of surge our capacity of officers, utilising up to 50% more, keeping 50% of the workforce on due to do extended hours on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday period. But that increases to 75% on the bank holiday weekend in August, because again we know and appreciate that that's going to be challenging around demand, because it inherently is. So that 50% or that percentage that we've decided on does give that degree of flexibility around ensuring that our officers can spread the load, can take time off, can still secure annual leave. So we're trying to strike that balance, really, looking after officer welfare and meeting the needs of the public as well.
Now, I hear what you're saying. Just from an external observation of this, it looks as though there's some real pressures coming on you here in the summer, and then there'll be a knock-on effect, knock-on consequence. Okay. Can I take you to page 18? This is antisocial behaviour, and you talk about antisocial behaviour falling. We've had this before. That it's certainly not the public perception, and I worry about this because we are getting we are getting people saying now, yes, well, you're antisocial behaviour, you tell us it's going down, we're telling you it's not, but we know it's not, and because you think it's going down, we don't think you're taking it seriously, you're not deploying officers to it, so we're not bothering to report. We seem to be getting into some sort of vicious downward spiral here, and I just wonder if you could again comment around that.
Yeah, no, absolutely is a concern for us, and one that we discuss as a partnership. I think we always consider why it would appear that a certain demand type is reducing. Is that about underreporting? I think within the context of that, this is about our incident demand, and it's about the category that's defined as ASB. So you'll note that the crime category has increased because actually if there's antisocial behaviour, there's often criminality that comes with it, so it just means it's being recorded under that particular banner. But certainly within the Community Safety Partnership Forum, we've got a subgroup that works around ASB for the entire borough, that's partnership led. We are asking ourselves those same questions, and we are listening to some of the feedback that comes from the public and from some of our elected members and parish councils who are telling us that that perception of ASB is still very much there. So it is very much on our radar, and I wouldn't want anybody to think that we're not taking it seriously. We've just refreshed our antisocial behaviour strategy for the borough. We have a subgroup that's chaired by one of our chief inspectors and a senior person within DFNC, and there are some work streams that they are currently underway with. I know that things like the off-road bikes and youth nuisance continue to be things that are reported to us, and we continue to respond to it.
Yeah, but didn't the Doncaster councillors reject the strategy, the ASB strategy?
Sorry, could you say that again?
The Doncaster councillors, they weren't happy with the strategy, were they?
No, I think there's been some consultation around the strategy. I think there's been some debate about whether it required a set or not. But that piece of work is ongoing.
Ongoing, okay. Page 19, and vacancies. Well, we've talked about this, haven't we? It's the summer surge, and I think I've probably said enough about that one, unless there's anything else you wanted to say around that. If not, shall we move to page... Sorry, go on.
No, go on, sir. If you
well, I'll take you on to page 20. And let's have a look. Well, it'll be over on 21, domestic abuse. And these high-risk cases managed by the 45 team, and the arrest rate is good, 92%, I think it's saying there, the average for the high-risk domestic abuse. I think the worry is around the non-high risks and what's happening there. Again, if you could say something around that would reassure us that there seem to be risks in those areas.
Of course there are. Yeah, of course there are. And naturally, we bring about a lot of scrutiny and focus around high risk DA offenders. They go through a proper sort of scoring process by a team outside of the district, and quite rightly we bring some priority focus to those. But we do still deal with medium and standard risk domestic abuse. It's a standing item on our daily management meetings. We discuss them at our weekly Thrive meetings that the command team chair, and PVP DCI runs a process where we put some scrutiny around all of our processes to do with domestic abuse. Overall we arrest somewhere in the region of 46% of all persons linked to domestic abuse. You've got to bear in mind that that's still well above the national average. And actually, in terms of our outcomes, we are in a reasonable position in terms of the outcomes that we have in Doncaster. And I believe that we make good use of other resolutions to domestic abuse incidents, including the use of DDPNs and DDPOs, and diversion activity, including the use of Inspire to Change, where we've got good partnerships. Something that we've seen as something quite successful here so far is the use of sort of problem-solving plans with some of the the couples that provide or result in the most demand for the police service with regular calls. And we've had a number of domestic abuse problem-solving plans in place, managed by our domestic abuse team, and it brings the partnership approach with IOM housing, victim support and drug and alcohol services to try and bring some resolution to the incidents of domestic between any given couple.
Are there vacancies in the team, in the domestic abuse team, Ian? Is that an issue?
There are some vacancies, but we've in any large sort of organisation we have vacancies in a number of different departments. We try and balance that up. It's always a use professional judgment and look at the demands that they take. We don't resource one particular department to the detriment of another. So I'm keen that we keep that balance between any vacancies that we have on the response teams and any that we have within the investigation team. I think the important thing to note is that they don't work in isolation. We take a collegiate approach here. So I have other investigation teams such as our reactive CID and our PVP, and they do support each other in times of peak demand. And we can always look across the board, across the rest of the force, to support our teams if we end up with a large number of cases at one particular time.
Okay. If we turn to page 22, domestic abuse outcomes, and there's a graph at the top of the page. It looks as if half the cases, the victims are not supporting that. Is that right? And
Yeah.
Do you have any views on that? Do you worry about that? Is that a...
Yeah, of course. It presents a challenge for us. I would say that we're not particular outliers in our borough or our county in that respect by any stretch. Often contact with emergency services are made by third parties, or may be made by a victim of DA who then is concerned about the consequences of making formal complaints. We often still find that we can engage with those individuals, victims of DA, with support services, but they are not supportive of a criminal prosecution. And that's where I think we have really good use of the domestic violence protection legislation, which enforces that space and that time and that distance between DA perpetrators and DA victims, and gives them a sort of 28-day period where the suspect is unable to contact the victim. The purpose of that is it gives that victim some time to reflect on their relationship and gives them a chance to access support and help from agencies outside of the police. And we're robust in Doncaster in policing those as well, is that we do enforce them and ensure that they are complied with, and we do make arrests for breaches of those if the DA perpetrator does make contact with that victim again.
Yes, you seem very proactive around that, which is clearly a good thing. Can you tell me, in the case of perpetrators, can they have multiple orders against them?
Well, they may, in terms of the DVPOs themselves.
Yes.
No, they will have one in place.
Right.
They've issued a DVPN, which is a domestic violence protection notice, which is authorised by the superintendent. But that then leads to a court hearing in a number of days, where the authorisation by the superintendent is reviewed by magistrates, and they determine whether that will extend to a 28-day period. There may, of course, in the case of there may be civil matters that sit in the background through family court orders, but certainly in terms of domestic violence orders, you would have one in place. They can be used again. They can be used sort of 6 months later or 12 months later, but they don't overlap.
Okay.
In the long term, if there's not to be a judicial outcome, because the whole aim is about separating parties, being able to get support services in, and therefore break the cycle of abuse and manage the risk in that way. DVPNs DVPLs are predominantly a relatively short-term measure. If we were to carry on working with that victim of crime and there wasn't to be a judicial, we'd consider other potential options around molestation orders and things like that.
Thank you. I'm on page 25 now, which is the heading is Safeguarding Child Exploitation, and 3.2, that particular paragraph talks about the force is still conducting a review of its structures to improve its response to CIC, and I wondered if there was any time scale here, if we knew when that would be complete. Or
PVP review, that's reporting in autumn.
Yeah.
Early autumn.
in the autumn.
We anticipate that.
Okay, thank you very much. On page 26, in para 4.6, it talks about an 8% reduction in burglary compared to the previous 3 months. And then we've already touched on this in a way, over the summer that will tend to increase. And I just wonder whether any specific plans around that addressing that potential increase, or is that covered by your general comments around surge?
Yeah, so there was an increase in September, and I think we still have, Commissioner, our burglary volumes are not where we want them to be. I think again, sort of when we try and look at patterns over the last 2 years, there's been some big impacts on recorded burglary, should I say, as a result of various different lockdowns and restrictions. So we are pleased that we now have stabilised our volumes as a result of that initial increase in September. Welcome very much a slight reduction in the first 3 months of this year. We've got a lot more work to do, and we have plans in place, overseen by the superintendent, with consideration to problem-solving plans. We're reviewing our use of forensic recovery and conversion, if you like, once we've got an identification. And we've improved our processes around identifying and locating to detain and arrest suspects where they're identified. Piece of work that will continue throughout the year.
Okay. We mentioned in these meetings before scene attenders, and they seem a very good idea, and I just wonder how that's going, whether that's going to be extended across all districts, or...
So yeah, we have 2 staff who are kind of dedicated to that and are attached to our reactive CID. I think it's something we will look. They're on a 12-month sort of basis that their position is reviewed. I think as recently as last week, conversations with SCTs about us building that into our business plan for that to be a permanent fixture. I think what enables us to do is some consistency at burglary scenes. And actually helps us with some of the patterns of offending, some of the MOs, and that link up directly with the rest of the CID office that they work within that team. So I certainly see their merit. When I was at DC back in Sheffield, sort of 15 years ago, we had burglary scene attendants then that were an invaluable resource for the wider teams.
But you say there it's a 12-month, and then to be when's the 12-month up?
Financial year, end of the financial year, we've been authorised
so they're here this financial year.
Yeah, we continued it from last year, Commissioner.
Sure. Thank you. Page 30, Ian, if we can, which is about what's working well. I just wanted to comment on the approach to the organised crime gangs. You seem to be really doing a lot of work there, seem to be having some successes, and that's good news for the people of Doncaster. I don't know whether there's anything more you want to say around that.
No, I suppose with organised crime, it is something that has the ability to touch and influence lots of different crime types, but isn't necessarily seen, I suppose, by the public as the work that happens to deal with organised crime. Clearly, we take over action in the form of search warrants and arrests, and we're always keen to try and publicise that and show where we have we've taken such action. You'll note within there that we've sort of mentioned a series of warrants in Edlington as an example where we've recovered drugs and ammunition, and warrants in a similar area where we've also recovered a shotgun. That happens frequently. It's relentless, but some of the other work isn't so overt and apparent to the public. So I suppose what we serve to highlight here is that out of all of our MAP members, we have some 55% of them that have some form of formal intervention in place against them, with 20% of them in custody or on sentence or remanded waiting trial. Some 10% are under an active investigation and are on bail. 7% are wanted and are actively being sought for active offences, and just under 20% have some sort of either civil order or licence conditions as a result of our work with the National Probation Service. So I think that there's testament really to some of the hard work that our teams do in conjunction with our Crime Services Department to sort of relentlessly pursue those involved in organised crime. And whether you're going to come to it a little bit later, Commissioner, Edlington is an example actually of something that we are very much underway with, and you'll note that I have it in Section 6 as an area that we are looking to bring continued focus for in the next quarter. But there was, Edlington is an example of a relatively small community where an even smaller cohort of people end up causing issues for the rest of the community, predominantly through the supply of controlled drugs. And we have a standing operation up here now called Operation Lion Alpha, where we're bringing some focus to those individuals. You've seen that we have focused on Edlington during Operation Duxford. We ran an over operation using our operational support units last week on Friday in and around that same area. And our neighbourhood team are involved in arrest and search warrants in and around the Edlington area to do with drug supply. And I'm certainly committed to that, and so much as I'm increasing the numbers on the neighbourhood team in Edlington to help support that work.
Yeah, and a lot of good partnership work there as well with the Doncaster.
Absolutely, we have really strong links with Doncaster Council in particular. They obviously work with us within organised crime work anyway, but they are very much working with us around Edlington. We have a Bronze Plus group that works around the some of the longer term issues there, including the environment as an example, which does make it a challenging place to police. Sure, thank you.
Sort of related on page 32, firearms, because you mentioned that in what you were just saying. 30% increase in viable firearms discharges in Doncaster. Notice that you referenced there that 38% of South Yorkshire firearms discharges are in your district. So given that, perhaps this is a wider question to the senior command team, it rather suggests that an armed crime team is what you need in Doncaster, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we recognise the acute nature of the issue, and I'll just assure you that we have got significant crime support resources targeting this issue at the moment in Doncaster, and will continue to do so till it's resolved.
Okay.
Our ambition around the armed crime team is to expand it to cover all areas of force, and it does support investigations into firearms offences across the whole force currently, but does it with a footprint that's really designed around the Sheffield challenges. So we do intend to invest more staff into that team as and when the sort of plans allow us to do that effectively.
Yeah, okay. So point them in Doncaster direction. Right. Page 33, there's a graph. I'm not a great graph person, but I can't get my head around this one at all. I just wonder what the graph is intended to show. It seems to show, to me, a decline in recorded offences.
Yeah, Commissioner, I suppose that's what the trend is. Actually, I think it shows that we're still consistent around this, because when you look at the start of the graph, actually a lot of that was during in the early part of last year, when actually lockdowns made it easier to detect drug supply, because drug dealers weren't staying at home. They were continuing to move around, and they were much more overt, because there was so little traffic on the roads. We are still consistent around drug our efforts to bring about the end of drug supply in our communities. You know, we executed 41 warrants in February and April alone this year, across the borough, between our 45 teams and our neighbourhood teams. So, you know, we are determined, and that work in Edmonton is an indication of it. We're determined to continue to tackle the drugs issues.
Okay, well, there were one or two graphs in here, charts, which didn't quite in my head. The narrative didn't quite fit the graph, I thought, but I'll leave that hanging in the air and let you reflect on that. Keeping to the same sort of themes, on page 34 at the top, 4.45, the seizure of cash as well as wraps, Class A drugs and so on from organised crime gangs. That's a big sum of money, and it seems that there is money to be had. I mean, it's good that we seize this cash and plough it back into communities, pocket funding. But B, it must be particularly, it must be a real deterrent to the gangs, isn't it, that they lose their assets? And I just wonder if there isn't an argument here for looking at, how we do more of this in South Yorkshire.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've got a, quite a focused financial investigation footprint across all 4 districts. I think the challenge for us at the moment is that it's not as consistent as we would like across all 4 districts. Certainly Barnsley seems to have some considerable success. We are seeing elements of that across the force, but our focus is very much trying to deliver a level of consistency at the moment.
But it can pay for itself.
Absolutely, it can. Absolutely, we have certainly across the past few years invested additional resources in on the basis that they pay themselves. But obviously, it's an ongoing process to monitor that.
We pick it up from safety and efficiency anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Just to note on page 35 in the work around speeding, this is immensely popular. I'm sure you realise with the public, the more of that the police do, the happier communities are. So just to commend you on that, I think. And the final thing I got was on page 38. What are we worried about? And this is paras 514, 550, hate crime. And you comment on it. It seems very low, 44% hate crime. And I thought this was one of the crimes where officers were supposed to attend, and yet, according to this, they don't. In all cases.
The numbers, Commissioner, the numbers around hate are still thankfully very low. So that does perhaps sometimes cause big swings in terms of the satisfaction, because it's such a small number of people that are surveyed. Sometimes online hate doesn't necessarily result in an attendance, by way of example. So some of these are reported via social media, about social media, and we don't always have a victim to go and see, because we might well record the fact that something is being seen and is perceived to be hate, but there's not necessarily an engaged victim. In the main, we do obviously go and attend them. Clearly, we're not happy about where we are in terms of victim satisfaction around hate. And one of our superintendents leads on victim satisfaction as to improve our victim satisfaction, and that will bring some focus to hate crime.
Okay. Are these mainly online?
Sorry, Commissioner.
Are these mainly online?
No, there's a mix. No, there's a mix. We always have seen an increase in sort of hate-related incidents via online messaging, social media, but I wouldn't say it's the majority of cases.
Okay. What would be interesting would be to see the trends here. So I'll ask Sam if she can make a note that for future report we might ask about some trends in that. I think that's everything I had, Ian, on the report. I don't think there's anything that you wanted to pick on at all and draw our attention to, or you're happy with that?
I think really, I suppose, Commissioner, just to re-emphasise what it is that we will continue to bring some focus to over the next quarter. So the work around our response teams and trying to sort of maintain that performance around emergent calls while bringing some improvements to priorities. I've mentioned Eddington, Commissioner. That's something there's quite a bit of investment in time across the partnership in terms of that particular community. And we'll also continue to bring that focus to the nighttime economy. I think we're already starting to see some benefits from the change in our approach in the nighttime economy and the impact it will start to have on no serious violence as we go through the summer, through things like St Ledger Festival and into the autumn with dark nights and then the World Cup football. We want to be confident that we've completely got a grip on that nighttime economy, and indeed I will be supporting that particular operation this Friday night and out with some of my teams to see how we're now implementing our new plans. And part of that, we're bringing some bits from Sheffield to Operation Sidewide Opportunity Centre and some particular operations that have been running in Sheffield that we will bring into Doncaster.
Yeah, quite right. Now you're a city. You have to do these city things. So great. Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Thank you for that. That was item 10 on our agenda. So we come to item 11, which is force performance against the police and crime plan. Treating people fairly. Had a lot of acronyms in this one. Which did my head in. It's rarely I stumble over them these days, but there were one or two. And I think for members of the public, it must be a bit mind-boggling. So if we can just ask people to note that, I think, in the future. Again, just looking at the report, or thinking about the report in general, a recurring theme, which we've already touched upon, seemed to be the whole question of new recruits and the fact that they're coming through, but they're not all there yet. And then you've got this time lag before you can really set them out on the streets. And I don't know whether I want to say anything.
Well, I think in the more general sense, it is a simple fact that whilst we are very, very pleased to be growing as an organisation, and we will have gone from a force of around 2,500 officers to a force of around 3,200 officers by the time that we've completed the uplift. During that period, we'll have recruited nearly 1,500 police officers. Now, that will tell you that probably about 60, just under 50% of the force will have less than 3 years service. That doesn't come without its challenges. Running alongside that, it will mean as our workforce continues to develop that we will have young sergeants and young inspectors, and that's why we're investing heavily in the Leadership Academy. We're investing significant amounts in the Sergeant Technical Skills course. We're changing the way that we actually select people for the role of sergeant and develop them. That'll be coming on stream in the autumn. And once we've completed that, we then move on to develop a Inspector's Technical Skills course and a similar infrastructure around training on middle leaders as we will have had in place by that point for sergeants. That's really, really important because the role of frontline supervision is going to be so vital in terms of ensuring that those young, enthusiastic officers who are joining us, and there's loads of them, and they're really bright and enthusiastic and will do a fantastic job for the people of South Yorkshire, but we've got to make sure that they're properly supported and properly trained and properly supervised to make sure that we maintain the high standards that we all want.
Absolutely. And continuing that theme, on page 44, this is 3.14, is around the whole issue of inclusivity, I think, and it talks about amongst the officer recruits, 14.8% self-define as other than white, which is good, and is a good number. I just wondered if you could say something around how you retain those at that level, because if we could do that, it would make such a difference.
There's a significant piece of work which is being led through our Equality Hub. So the Equality Hub is an umbrella organisation for all of our staff associations. And what we're doing, particularly through the Muslim Police Association and the Race, Inclusion and Equity Association, is where new, other than white starters are joining us, we are assigning them mentors, signposting them to the support networks to really help them settle into the organisation and perhaps discuss any concerns that they might have and get a perspective from somebody from a similar background to themselves. And we're really seeing that that's paying real dividends for us now, and we're just starting to branch out now as well into those staff networks, making contact with people that are in the process of joining us. So last week the Association of Muslim Police Officers met, and they had an open part of their meeting which invited people who are in our recruitment pipeline so that they could come in and spend time with officers from a Muslim background to sort of share some experiences and really build that community within our policing community for them.
No, I think that's right. It's it'd be really good to keep that kind of percentage.
Certainly we're really pleased at the impacts of our more recent recruitment campaigns, and we're certainly starting to see some improvement. You'll be aware, obviously, we've invested a full-time inspector into this particular area. That's been supported by a number of officers seconded from districts during the recruitment campaign. We will be doing that again as we continue to recruit moving forward. We've also seen that certainly our degree holder recruitment campaigns have put the degree apprentice, particularly the detective DHET programme, is proving more proper. We are getting better results from that in terms of a more diverse cohort of student officers.
I was astonished at the number of people who wanted to be detectives.
I was a detective for many years, Commissioner, and would thoroughly recommend it to anyone.
I'm sure that's right, but was it 24 places? Have you got 700 applicants or something like that? That's quite something. Somebody can't hang on to more.
And certainly, it's the popularity of that campaign has made us start to rethink what will our recruitment profile look like going forward, because we do, there's a national detective shortage. We do struggle to recruit people from within the organisation to the detective career pathway. And I think that as we continue to expand and we continue to expand our specialist functions, we mentioned the PVP review, that's not in response to necessarily to weaknesses in our current approach, but it's us thinking about what will the future look like, what capacity and capability will we need in the future to manage a range of specialist CID functions. The workforce that fulfills that capacity and capability in the future, I think, will be very much a blended workforce of people who have some experience in policing, moving into a detective career pathway, and direct entry detectives coming straight through the front door.
That page, of course, had some of your PCDA, PCDAG. I mean, I understand those, but members of the public must really scratch their heads.
No, fair enough.
And these become public documents.
No, I understand that.
On page 46, apart from this strange thing in bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, something called a chaplain.
All right.
I kind of understand that. 3.29, the Forces New Values and Behaviours Framework. I just wondered, partly where it came from, whether that was just yourself, Lauren, or where that came from. And then something around whether you intend to evaluate it in some way or see whether it's embedded.
It would be wrong of me to take all the credit for this. It's a programme of work that started before I was appointed to become chief. It started with some sort of cultural review work, which kicked off really about 2 years ago, and identified that actually we have a code of ethics, there's a competency and values framework, but actually it can be quite complex for people and cross over. And what we really wanted to do internally is just focus on some core values, but actually some behaviours that sit under them, so we could give our staff some real clear messaging about how we expect them to demonstrate fairness, integrity and trust, which are the 3 values which we focused on. In terms of evaluation, we're not at the stage yet of looking to evaluate it, but what we are planning to do is build in sort of through all of our promotion processes and through our leadership training and sort of supervisory programs that they're embedded in there. And actually I suppose the true evaluation of it will come in actually the behaviours of people changing. So do complaints go down? Does satisfaction amongst people, amongst the workforce? What does our morale survey look like? Because actually the aim should be that all these things make people recognise that they're working in an inclusive organisation where they're valued. So there'll be some longer term measures around the success of the programme.
But you will be able to test it out if there are things
we will be able to test it out.
Good. I'm on page 48 now, and PCDA in 3.36. It talks about the long recruitment process, and again, I wonder if you could say something about that. And whether, I presume this is a national problem, and therefore, is anything being done about it nationally? Because it does seem to be a real problem, a real worry that people drop out.
Yeah, I think it's always been a long process. I know when I applied to be an officer, it took about 14 months to go through the process. And I think that there's been an expectation that is how it is. I think the issue that we have now is that actually the changing dynamics of what's available to us as a potential workforce, people aren't prepared to wait for such significant period of time. But there are things which really tie our hands, such as having to get people through the vetting process, through all the necessary and proper security checks before they start. One thing that our HR people are now doing is establishing a programme on probably not really the right thing, but about keeping people warm. So once they are in the application process to join us, and we've they sort of got in, but they've still got a few sort of maybe admin type things to go through, and perhaps wait for an intake. It's actually a programme whereby we're bringing them into the force on a regular basis, so we're sort of having those contact points for them, making them feel that they're part of the organisation. We're starting to build some relationships with them between us and them, but also allowing them to sort of build networks amongst the people that they will be joining in the future. And we think that by doing that, that should help us to sort of retain people on that pathway. They'll have the support of us and of each other.
And is that feasible given the numbers?
Yeah. So the team are actively looking at what does that campaign look like. So and it will be a variety of things. Some of it will be, as the chief's just said, bringing people in to meet their their future colleagues, etc. Some of it will be around just regular communication, some kind of countdown clock. So using a number of different tools and techniques so that people feel part of the SYP family, even though they may not have physically joined us or be part of their cohort yet. Because we're very conscious that, as the chief mentioned, people have other opportunities with other forces, because everybody's got the same challenge at the moment. So we want to make sure that we stand out as much as we possibly can do, to keep them properly engaged with us while they go through the necessary checks that we need to make before they join us.
Is there a lot of that? People, multiple applications to forces?
Yeah. There's nothing to stop an applicant from applying for 2 or 3 forces or more. And some of it is about the timescale of who's quickest in some respects. We are, unfortunately, this is not just a police officer challenge for us. It's a challenge in all recruitment at the moment that people put in multiple applications, and then in some respects it comes up first with contracts and the details. So we can't solve what is a national challenge, but what we are trying to do is from a local level make sure that we've done everything we possibly can do to keep their engagement and their interest, so that hopefully they aren't going to vote with their feet because
you know, a similar or neighbouring force has come quicker in terms of their process.
Yeah.
But one thing in amongst all of this is that we cannot and we will not compromise our vetting standards.
No.
It is really important that the vetting takes place thoroughly and is as tight as it can be.
Well, there's a question of keeping people warm. Don't bring them into this room. That's.
I was just thinking,
a bit too much.
I see. It's messing with the temperature.
it went from one extreme to the other.
Yes, I can feel the cold air. Right, I thought it was punishment for me for some reason. But 340, page 48. Core and flex have been completely defeated. I have no idea what core and flex are.
So we recognise that whilst we want to maintain a consistent standard of policing across South Yorkshire, there are unique features about each district in terms of the type of crime and disorder issues that they face, about local community demands and what the community expects. And what we want to do is to make sure that the district commanders have got sufficient autonomy to be able to determine that locally. So what we intend to do is define that part of policing locally, which is absolutely consistent across all 4 districts. So in every district there will be neighbourhood policing teams, there will be a response function, there will be certain core investigative functions such as a CID main office, a PVP team, a DA team, but there may be around the margins of that some differences, and we want to make sure that the district commanders have got the discretion to be able to do that. So that's what, when we talk about that, that's how we will continue to develop the operational model of policing across South Yorkshire.
That's the flex bit.
What I can assure you is the overwhelming majority of that will be core.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want anyone to think that there's going to be a postcode lottery of policing. This is why we want a core model of policing that delivers consistently across South Yorkshire. But you know, if Doncaster chooses to put some of its additional resources into organised crime, whereas parts of Barnsley want to put it into rural crime, for example, there'll be a small amount of discretion for district commanders to be able to do that.
I can't imagine anybody other than Doncaster would want a prisoners team.
No,
No,
exactly.
probably
That'll be a flex.
Yeah.
Flex bit. Oh yes. Well, Doncaster seems to have everything. Don't they? So, turn to page 54 and 3.75. Following on from the success of the complaint recording practices, and it talks about the reduction time of handling complaints. I just wonder how we could be reassured that the reduction in the time isn't leading to some change in the quality of what's happening here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is. I think one of the issues that we had as a force is it was simply just taking us too long to record them. We have quite a bureaucratic process for doing that. We've got some fresh leadership and professional standards that reviewed that, and all they work very closely with your office in terms of complaints. And by implementing a new process, we've been able to bring that down to 10 working days or less. But as it says in the paper, our desire is that we have complaints recorded in accordance with our statutory guidelines within 5 days. And you know, so many of our complaints that we receive are about lessons to be learned, and members will be quite rightly bring, well, we absolutely, we openly acknowledge at times we don't get everything right. More often than not, it's about lessons to be learned, and it's really important that both in terms of providing some satisfaction for that member of the public that we've listened and that we've learned and we've taken some action to resolve the issues as quickly as possible, but also in terms of those improvements in organisation, the quicker we can identify these lessons, learn them, take action to deal with them, the better we'll be as an organisation.
And the lessons learned abroad, which is referenced in 3.79, that has met, has it? I should know the answer to this, but
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
right. I don't think I've got anything else actually to ask about that, unless Tim, there was something you meant to
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was item 11. 12 we've taken off the agenda because there's nothing there. So 13 citizens in policing down, 59 to 72. It's quite a short report, so do you want to say just a brief word about it?
Yeah, it's just a summary report just to let you know where we are with things involving special constabulary, volunteers in the police and cadets. And I know you and I have spent a really pleasurable evening recently at Cadets Evening, where we've awarded a number of our cadets for their contribution of their programme. But yeah, in summary, special constabulary currently stands at a strength of 122. We have ambitions to increase that to close to 300 over the next 2 years, which does present challenges.
Sorry, to how many?
280, close to 300 over the next couple of years. That does present challenges around the tutoring aspect and the training aspect because of the demands that we've got around the student programme of our paid workforce. But nonetheless, that's our target, and we've got some training courses that are planned in earnest beginning in January next year. So we're also piloting a particular way of a special constabulary learning programme that we use our current specials to support us in that programme, and we've got the College of Policing, and we're working with the Sheffield Hallam University looking at how that programme will develop over time, because we're looking at that as a platform to come in to be a regular paid constable. So there's lots of things going on in relation to the specials. Volunteers, it's my ambition for every neighbourhood team to have a volunteer to support them in their work. We're seeing some great inroads in relation to that, to support all neighbourhood teams in relation to, for example, callbacks to people that you mentioned at ASB, to let them know the results and the actions that we've taken. I think that'd be a really positive thing. We've piloted a similar scheme in Rotherham and seen some huge benefits around satisfaction, around people that suffer from antisocial behaviour, report it to police, and then because of the nature of antisocial behaviour, it changes from one day to the next, different times. It's really key for us to keep our communities informed about the actions that we're taking. So we've seen that work at Rotherham. We'd love to do that widen that in all neighbourhood areas. So we've currently got 61 volunteers covering a variety of roles, and the neighbourhood teams are really being proactive around trying to secure additional volunteers to support their local work. Police cadets, we've got 58 cadets in the force at the moment, and it is really lovely to see what they do and the contributions they give, not only to developing their own skill set on cadet evenings, but working with communities. And we've used them on a number of various operations, for example, selling underage alcohol to underage children in licensed premises, and things along which an operation similar to that, and they really enjoy that. And it's telling to show some of the qualifications that our cadets go on to achieve, and we awarded a number of our cadets some high-profile sort of certificates of commitment, and some of the marks that they've achieved in some exams around police studies have been outstanding. So we're doing really well with our cadets, really proud of them, and they obviously also support us in things like the Guard of Honour and things like that around various events at Sheffield Cathedral.
Well, I noticed some of those certificates, they got 100%. Some of them,
yeah, some of them are hopefully police officers of the future that will continue to service the community. So they make us very proud. And then finally, just to mention the Mini Police, which is a programme of work that we do through the sort of engagement teams that we've got that we work with alongside our colleagues in Surrey. When I work down south, the South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue colleagues, that we go into schools. So we've currently got the Mini Police in 30 primary schools, and again, that's a real opportunity for us to engage with young children and deliver some really key messages around antisocial behaviour, personal safety, things like stranger danger and various aspects like that. So they're the key bits that I would like to pull out of it.
When I first came here, people talked a lot about specials, first became PTC. The numbers were very high at that time. I don't know whether you can recall what they were.
I think at one point there was an ambition around the number being about 500, although I don't think it ever got that high. I think historically the Special Constabulary attracted a number of people joining who joined very definitely with a plan that they wanted to become
Yeah.
regular
Yes.
officers.
Yes.
And for quite a number of years, the only way you could apply to be a regular officer within South Yorkshire was if you were already a member of staff
Oh.
or if you were a special.
Mm.
So actually, while the numbers were high, there was an awful lot of turnover within that.
Mm.
Whereas what we're really looking to do now within the special constabulary is recruit people to that role who want to be specials, who are doing this
Mm.
as either additional to their job or, they're not working and this is something that they want to do to contribute. I was at the most recent attestation about 3 or 4 weeks ago where we had 8 new special constables join, and certainly I would say at least 50% I would say are there because they are wanting to be a special constable, make a sort of voluntary contribution, whereas some of the others are maybe a bit younger and thinking that they want to do this to taste what police working might be like for them. Is it the sort of thing that they want to follow in the future? But some really good people joining us.
Yeah, that's very good. And we don't mention Surrey, Dan.
No, that's when I was.
No,
I
looked at the figures for the number of police officers lost during austerity in Surrey. 8.
Oh.
8. So
50% of the budget comes to the precepts.
yes. I've now got a complete list of how many were lost in every force during the period of austerity, which is astonishing. You go from 8 to about a third of your force or something like that, but it's absolutely astonishing. No, there's austerity and austerity. Thank you very much, that was very useful. So, item 14, findings of the Lancaster University burglary report. This is you again, Dan, 63.
Yes, this was something that you requested a
Yeah.
few months ago now, and it was just in relation to some of the work that we did around certain areas of Sheffield, for example, where we experienced some high levels of burglary, and just talks around, outlines what we did and the outcomes of that. I suppose it's focused on an approach that where we look at and examine what we can do in relation to the victim of burglaries, so those people that unfortunately incur a burglary in their premises, and also looking at the location, so looking at locations of where the burglaries occur and what we can do. For example, we might work with housing providers to improve security of homes, and the other element is around the offenders and how we focus our attention on disrupting offenders, prosecuting them, capturing them, maximising opportunities around forensics and forensic identification and various other things. This particular study looked at a series of streets in Sheffield where, for me this is not rocket science. This is about police doing what they do best, is engaging with the public and the communities that we serve. So where you've got high prevalence of burglary, the neighbourhood teams really were proactive around engagement and making sure that local communities or the local residents in those streets were aware of the challenge that was in their neighbourhood, and working with them to improve security, be vigilant, and report suspicious sightings, etc. In turn, we also provided additional high visibility patrols as obviously a visual deterrent. And a certain period of time, whilst we were enacting this particular operation in conjunction with the university, COVID hit. And that produced a bit of a unique mix because it prevented us from doing a lot of those face-to-face contacts with members of the public unless we really needed to. It prevented us from going into residents' homes to support them with what we call Operation Shield, which is effectively an invisible marking kit, so you can't see it, but there's an identification on an item of property that we'd be able to identify if we come across it or if it's stolen. It prevented us from doing that. And what this showed was that those areas where we had interacted with the residents of those streets, where we had managed to pass on that information, experienced a far greater reduction in burglaries than areas where we didn't have that interaction, where we would have liked to have had that interaction. So basically we've taken the learning of that and we're constantly scanning areas across the whole of South Yorkshire where we can use similar techniques. And it doesn't just lie there with our involvement with potential victims that might experience episodes of burglary or other crime. It's also working with things like second-hand shops, deal with items that you would imagine would be stolen from burglary and then resold. We do a lot of work with those areas of business, and we've identified a number of areas across all the 4 districts where we're utilising the same methodology really, and working with communities to maximise the opportunity of preventing crime rather than just detecting it. So it's just to outline some of the successes that we've had and the methods that we've used.
And you are clear that this concentrating on the 12 streets or however many it might be doesn't simply lead to displacement, it really does.
It does bring
down
it really does produce some reductions. I mean, it'd be wrong for me not to suggest that displacement doesn't occur, because I'm sure it does, and that can often be quite tricky to identify. But we are seeing some real good benefits of this methodology and seeing some reductions of burglary and other crime types where it's used. So it's something that we're continuing to roll out in other areas, not just in Sheffield.
Yeah, I think it's all really good that I read in here. The only thing that puzzled me was the graph on page 66. Does the graph illustrate the narrative?
I think what the graph is effectively showing is that those where we've focused this particular work in the neighbourhoods that we've utilised it are showing greater reductions in other areas where we haven't used it at all. So though we're seeing some reductions, they're greater in neighbourhoods where we've utilised this methodology, I think is what it's trying to get across.
But if you start on the left and come across to the right, don't seem to... Anyway, I'll leave you to ponder the graph. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. 14. Chief Executive Reports, PCC Decisions, item 15.
Commissioner, there's only been one since the last meeting, one set of decisions from you around the Proceeds of Crime Act Community Grant Scheme. We heard about the POCA seizures previously in Doncaster's report. Well, this is how those seizures translate into good for the community through your grant scheme. The first one is self-explanatory, but the second one in relation to Sedaka led to an inquiry when we did the report in relation to what's the figure first of all and how much was it up to. We're told that the figure was £2,000, so by my reckoning the whole of that total is 21,510, not 27,010 in relation to that particular decision record. So unless there's any questions, that's
I think we'll have to have that checked by the Chief.
Sophie, if you could check my maths, somebody did it earlier in the meeting, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the work programme, Michelle.
So in terms of the work programme, we go 3 months in advance just to show the force and ourselves what's coming up. We did have a conversation in relation to the force performance report, Tim, in relation to reporting on victims' code of practice is probably something we need to look at going forward. I'll talk to you at our next agenda setting meeting about whether a dedicated victims report would be useful in capturing victim satisfaction performance, particularly hate crime that we featured today, but also VCOP compliance if that's okay, but just a heads up that we'll have a look at that.
Okay. So finally, Assurance Panel reporting the IEP, which is pages 75 to 28. I don't think we've got Michael on the...
No, he's on holiday.
Okay. But we have appointed him interim chair of the IEP. Is there anything else to say, Michelle?
No, the report's there in terms of the workshop, and we've set the work plan now. We've finalised that. And that will lead to the future reports by exception in terms of the active work. We've got thematic members all appointed now, and as you asked the Chief around the cultural change programme, there's a presentation to the next IEP meeting in relation to that cultural change programme.
Yeah. I think that's everything, everybody, unless somebody's got something I don't know about. Okay, thank you very much. That was a very swift meeting. Got a good time today.